Welcome to the She Force Show. I'm your host, Amy Carlson. Today, I have my guest, Cyndy Broekers, nostalgic artist and creatives coach. Welcome, Cyndy.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This is
It's
exciting.
great to have you here today. I'd love to kick it off by talking about what it is you do
Hmm.
and anything you want to share about your journey of how to get to where you are.
Cool. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm an artist and have been only for a few years and coach to creatives. And so I'm like a mindset coach rather than teaching people to be creative and paint or draw or anything like that. I prefer, like, I'm working with creatives who are not just painters or artists or sketch artists or anything like that. It's all artists, it's musicians, it's jewelry makers, sculptors, all that sort of thing, writers, poets, because everyone has the same issues and blocks. So we work with that, as well as on the side I make my own art and sell that. So how I got into that was actually my entire adult life I was in corporate until my late 40s. And the last 20 years of that, I was in human resources. And I ended up with a health issue. And I have had a health issue. I've had Crohn's disease since my 20s. And I ended up in hospital with an emergency surgery in 2017. And I couldn't return to work straight away. I had a few months off. But there was a moment there that when I came home, I recognized that my experience of being in hospital and coming home, I was alone the entire time. And I started to kind of unravel that. And I'd already been coaching at that point as well on the side of doing, working in corporate. And that essentially led me down the path of doing all the emotional work and uncovering the fact that I had denied a lot of emotions, and that was affecting my experiences in life and my relationships and things. So that led me on this path, and I decided not to return to corporate. It wasn't what I enjoyed. It wasn't what was important to me. And I figured that out, and I discovered that being creative was important to me. It'd been there my whole life, just coming up in different ways. So I made the decision to go. I'd always wanted to paint. I'd been able to draw and sketch, through my childhood and teens and stuff. And I decided that I would take one of those, those paint and sit classes that, they're everywhere. I thought that's the safest way. I can go have a little bit of wine, chill out, and figure out, like, I literally did not know how to get paint. Like, where did you put paint? How did you get it out of a tube and put it somewhere, and then get that onto a brush, and then get that onto a canvas? Like, I had to be right. I had to know the proper way to do it. So that's what I did. I went to one of those classes, created a cool looking frog with glasses, and it took off from there. I came home that night and I was like, I need to do this. And I had paints and easels and stuff already in the house that I'd got from friends, never used them. And from that moment on, I haven't stopped painting. I took art classes and formal education and that sort of thing, just in the last, since that was 2019 when I had the paint and sip class. So yeah, that's how I got.
Part of what you are, I feel like what you are saying, and empower others to do. It's never too late.
Exactly.
Late.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's okay to mess around and muck it up and it not be perfect, and find a safe space to start somewhere. Yeah.
So you got real clear on some things after spending some time alone, being in the hospital, being away from work.
Yep.
And you were able to clarify and prioritize. And tell me how this piece came about. That one of the things that I know you talk about and that you work with people on is emotional flexibility.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
tell me more about that.
That is, the term came up, first of all, because mindset is kind of where people, what the term people use when they were talking about coaching and changing the way we think and reframe things. But for me, mindset feels really rigid and, is set,
Yeah.
and it's quite the opposite. So I was like, I don't like using that. It just feels like I prefer expansion and stuff like that. So, and then I work with a coach as well who teaches emotional fitness, and he comes from a very athletic background, and it's very masculine. And some of what I teach is what he teaches. However, there were still some things missing for me in the way that I teach it, and it still was, not quite right. So I thought, well, flexibility kind of it describes it really well. And what it means is it's essentially learning that, how we react to uncertainty, how we react in certain situations. It's learning to respond rather than react. And the premise of it is, and what I like to teach too, is that we learn that it starts with our thoughts, our emotional responses. First of all, I like to teach the difference between emotions and feelings. And real quickly, like, emotions are more that organic, natural, spontaneous feeling, that spontaneous feeling of joy and love, or at the birth of a child, or grief at the loss of something, or it could be at a football game and it's just that sudden outburst. It's like you don't think about it, it just happens. That's emotion. Feelings, on the other hand, which is, and also those emotions aren't every day. We don't have births, deaths, football games every day. So whereas feelings come more from what we're thinking about, and then we give that thought a meaning, whatever the story we tell it, whatever meaning we give it, and then that meaning triggers the feeling. For the most part, we call it emotions because that's what everybody's used to,
Right.
But behind that's that difference.
That's
so
a
that's
distinction.
yeah. Which means also we're in control of those feelings. And if we step it back, we're in control of the meaning we give it. And then if we step it back again, we're in control of our thoughts. But it's the real change comes, the important stuff comes where in the meaning part, I think. And we can choose from whatever meaning we want to give it. So it's learning that, it's practicing that. And then once we have that flexibility, and the other thing with the emotional flexibility is having the range of emotions. So what I learned through my own personal coaching and my journey was that because of my history and my childhood and all the tribal conditioning and schooling and everything else, we learn to switch off some emotions. And and we're denied them sometimes, whether they're good emotions or bad emotions. Sometimes we're not allowed to be angry or sad at home, or we're not allowed to be overly playful or silly. So we learn as kids to dampen that down, and then we take that through to our adult life, and that affects everything else with our experiences. So it's getting back in touch with all of the emotions that we've denied, and there's lots of them, and figuring that out. And that takes a little bit of time, but once we have, and we recognize and we can validate ourselves for that and have those emotions and have access to them and know when they're appropriate, that's that emotional flexibility, that's that range. And then we can deal with anything that comes along. That's where I think resilience is built. And we can deal with uncertainties, and we can deal with pressures and stresses and doubts that get thrown at us. So that's that emotional flexibility.
Beautiful, really nice description. And I can tell you're passionate about it as you're describing. And what you just said, resilience can come from emotional fitness, emotional flexibility. I feel like that's a really important piece because I think a lot of times the word resilience is used often, but we might be going, okay, but how?
How exactly?
And so what you just described, I feel like really filled that in nicely.
Oh, good. Yeah. And I saw it a lot with creatives that I studied with, when I did my art classes and programs, and other creatives, colleagues that I've met along the way in the last few years and in my art journey. And without that piece, people quit or they get stuck and they're frozen in overwhelm for months or even years. And they're not getting to the point where they initially had this dream of being a full-time creative or a professional creative, or just having it in their lives somehow. And then when the challenges come, as they naturally do, then they stop. Naturally we get stuck into limiting beliefs and fears and procrastinate. We do all the self-sabotage stuff. We procrastinate, and all that self-doubt stuff comes up. And if we don't have the tools to deal with that, and we don't have that whole range of that and that emotional flexibility, we stay there. We can't move forward. And then we give up on our dreams, or we just dabble in it every now and then, and it's heartbreaking to watch.
So you work with that with creatives, and that makes a lot of sense of how you just described what you've seen and then how that comes into play. How about, I know something else that you work with is energetic blueprint.
Mm-hmm.
Can you describe more about that?
Absolutely. So another one of my favorite things is human behavior. And during my corporate career, I learned about and trained in the DISC model, DISC, as a behavioral tool, not a personality profile. It's quite different to Myers-Briggs and those types of personality profiles. This is more of a learning what our natural energy style is, that we're naturally born with, and how that influences the way we communicate to people and that sort of thing. And so I learned that for the corporate world, and became a consultant in it. Then when I was doing my art program, I did a 12-month fine art mastery program. In that program, they taught a piece of DISC, and how knowing your natural energy style in DISC affects the way you paint, because this was a course for painters. But of course that can go across to any creative work. And I thought, of course it does. That's brilliant. I know all this stuff. This is fantastic. And then I watched as I saw people, either struggling or creating in a style they've always done, and being disappointed with it. And they were disappointed because they were trying to paint in a style they liked, but it wasn't actually natural to their energy. So that was really cool. So I really liked that. And then I learned about human design, and that kind of all came together. It's like, we all have our own blueprint of our natural energy style. Once all the conditioning has been stripped off, and we start to, and so that comes back to the emotional flexibility stuff as well. So it all ties in together really nicely. And then it's like starting to learn who we are again, who we really, really are, right down in our core. And that feels really expansive, and that's where we can then touch into our potential and see all of that. It's beautiful. I don't know how else to describe it. It's just it's coming back to feeling like, yes, that's me. That feels amazing.
Absolutely. That sort of like coming home kind of feeling to ourselves.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that weaves right into one of the things I wanted to bring up is the topic of confidence.
Mm-hmm.
And so you queued this up perfectly. When we get to feel like we are being ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
that seems like it's really tied to confidence. And in your own experience, for your own confidence, coming into this, leaving corporate, coming into this new you, new career, how that has affected your confidence. And then also when you're working with creatives, what you notice about them coming
Yeah.
alive as you coach them.
Yeah. It's working through this, it can be quite intense, and it's also so worth it because it does give at the end, or even through it, as you start breaking down, okay, this is why I do the things I do. This is why I've been, emotionally reactive, or, one way or the other. Just that insight alone starts to kind of like take the pressure off and go, okay, it's not me. It's just been my environment, or, it's not, yeah, sorry. I'm almost got off on another tangent. So, doing this work, it gives us the tools and the insight so that we do start to feel more confident. It kind of takes that pressure off. It takes that weight off. We feel relief, and knowing, starting to identify what our values are, and what matters most to us. And like you said, it's like that feeling of coming home. It's like, okay, it's peaceful, it's confident. We become more compassionate with ourselves, and we start to trust ourselves, which is huge, isn't it? And then we breathe, like you just did it. We breathe so much more easily. And there's that expansion again. And then we have clarity, and then we can see, everything that does matter. And then the other stuff kind of like can fall away. So that's what I see. That's what I notice. And that all comes back to having and feeling all of those things gives us that confidence. It gives us that confidence that we can create more freely. We've got more space as well. It gives us mental space. It gives us emotional space, which eventually comes out into our physical space. And we can create more freely.
Yeah.
Makes sense?
Confidence, what you just said about confidence and taking the pressure off. I had not thought about it in that way.
Mm-hmm.
But now reflecting that back of what you just said, it makes so much sense. And like you mentioned, like I felt it in my body as you were
Yeah, you
saying
see it.
that. I had a big sigh, like, oh
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that is a beautiful connection.
Mm.
So what is next for Cyndy? What are you working on personally, professionally?
I so next for me, first of all, is I'm working on a course at the moment, and well, it's pretty much done. So I'm about to go into promoting for the next few weeks, and then starting a 6-week program on the emotional flexibility stuff.
Right?
And that's I'm kind of aiming for. I'm not sure the exact date. It's like in about 4 weeks anyway. So I'm sort of working on that. I've got a bigger program that's going to be expanded on that even more. And at the same time, some new artwork. So I've got some ideas for some new artwork to create. I want to do some really large pieces. And so that's all sort of coming. I've got that swirling around in my head, and I like to create some little sketches of what I'm thinking, and then I'll just go and paint it. So yeah, and then I'm thinking about, I've had a lot of fun with this journal that I recently had published, and I'm using my own one now because I love journaling. And so I'm thinking about sometime in the near future doing another one. So because I had a lot of fun with that. That was amazing. And that's another thing that's dear to my heart. So because journaling comes into all this, this is how I discovered all of the things about myself. And you know, it's important to write through those things. So yeah, so that's kind of what's on my agenda, as well as, you know, I can't believe it's the second half of the year. So it's finishing off all those things for the year. You know, it's hitting all the goals that I or the intentions. I usually talk more about intentions than goals that I had for this year. And then some personal time off somewhere in there as well, which is important. I generally don't do that. So I'm learning to do that more.
Good for you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Learning to do too. So maybe we can hold each other accountable.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely.
Oh, that's great. So as we wrap this up today, Cyndy, is there anything that you didn't get a chance to share with the audience that something you just find so fascinating, or a little nugget that you feel like, I would love everyone to know this?
I think, you know, when we say something's a priority, and, you know, yes, whether it's creativity or changing a habit or something in our life, we say, yeah, it's a priority. The best way to know whether that's truly a priority or not is whether we're actioning it. Otherwise, if there's no action happening and we keep saying, yeah, it's a priority for me to get fit, or, you know, start some creative work, or whatever it is, if we're not taking a step and actioning that, then it's an aspiration. So if we give ourselves some grace and some forgiveness and understand that, and that's okay, because life gets in the way. Sorry, that's my life gets in the way. Then have a think about what we can action. And when we've got those tools to help us step forward, we can then realize what our true priorities are and then take action towards them. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So I like to help people understand the difference between a priority and an aspiration. And it's not, I don't mean to, it's not harsh. It's just, it's saying, you know, it's having that compassion with ourselves to say, yeah, I keep saying that's a priority, but I'm really not doing anything about it. So is that going to be an aspiration that I put up there for another time? Or am I actually going to make that a real priority? Or is there something else that like, have a look at where we're spending our time and our money? That's where our priorities are.
Great. And it, you know, what you were saying there, it allows for some curiosity instead of judgment, just some curiosity.
Exactly. Yes.
And then we don't feel heavy. I know, like, if there's that thing on the to-do list or that thing I say is a priority, and it obviously must not be sometimes, as you're saying, it just gets heavy. If I continue to leave it on my list, if I continue to say that it's a priority, and then not take action.
Yeah. Yeah.
It weighs me down.
Exactly. It does. It's very heavy. And being curious about it is, you know, that's how I approach everything. It's like, and I do that in my journal. I'm like, well, why am I not doing this? And then dig deeper into it. And then, okay, well, actually something else has just opened up.
Well, on that note, Cyndy, it has been a delight to visit about these fascinating topics, mind-opening opportunities, and just hearing your perspectives and your vision.
Thank you. It's been great chatting with you. I love chatting with you.
Oh, I do too. And let's do part 2.
Absolutely.
I know we've got some fun things that we chatted about before we hit the record button that I'd love to have you come back on and continue the conversation.
Absolutely. I'd love to. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Cyndy.